Hello, we are bringing you a brand new episode of Theologically Speaking today, but we wanted to give you guidance that it is of a sensitive topic, so we ask that you take care when listening with children around.
So, theologically speaking,
Hello, and welcome to Theologically Speaking. I'm Kyle Leon Henderson.
and I'm Father Ian Elliott Davis.
And we've taken a few weeks off to do a few things here and there and take a little rest, but we're back with a very exciting topic.
Yes,
Today we're talking about sexuality.
big topic.
And one that I think a lot of churches don't. They have a flat line, fast and hard rule, move on.
Right,
And that's not the case for human nature,
right.
and that's not the case for our church. So,
right.
where do we begin with sexuality? Is there any thoughts on the top for you?
Is a gift from God. We discover more about ourselves, and we discover more about God in sharing intimacy with ourselves and with other people.
I think I want to start really just from a space where people can kind of start where they're at, like, because a lot of us came from different traditions in the Episcopal Church, and we're told. I mean, I was brought up told and taught that sex is for two married people between a man and a woman,
Right.
and there you are. You can, and some traditions tell you that it's for the purpose of procreation, and some traditions, even the tradition I was brought up in, is sure it's fun for married people, and that's it.
Right.
A married man and a married woman.
Well,
So-
that's a step ahead of where I was as a youngster. We were terrified of sex. It was a frightening, taboo subject that we didn't really want to address or talk about, even in school. You know, the sex education curriculum was pathetic. It was really, really poor. And then we went into the early 80s, and HIV and AIDS reared its ugly head, and that frightened
do you
people
think
even more.
do you think the AIDS epidemic sort of changed the way that we thought about talking about it? Maybe not thought about it theologically, but at least what the message was, because like you said, and over here in the United States too, the traditions were just don't talk about it. But then not talking about it left an entire generation of gay men in a space where they didn't have the knowledge, and it led to a world pandemic.
Yes, yeah.
And it's not just gay men. It was a bloodborne disease, and a lot of people were left without the resources because they didn't have education,
But there
drug
was
addiction, and all that too. But
there was a lot
today
of
we're talking about sexuality.
guilt about it as well. I mean, there was. I remember when the movie Philadelphia came out, and that really did make an impact on many communities, and there was a kind of a hierarchy of who was the most guilty and who was the least guilty was in the back of people's minds. Oh, well, if you had a blood transfusion and you'd come into contact with HIV that way, then you were innocent and you had to be pitied.
Well, and in the South, especially growing up, I was born in the late 80s, and in the early 90s, I was sort of aware that was the conversation, that AIDS was God's mandate on your life and your choices of that. AIDS was what you had coming because you sinned against God.
Right.
And I think that sort of peppers people's minds too, still to this day, in a lot of spaces.
That's a
and lot of places.
wicked perversion and contradiction against everything that we know about God.
Right.
Because God is a God of love and a God of hope, and encourages faith and maturity and growth in us. He doesn't treat us like just animals. We are not treated like rats in an experiment. We are God's beloved children, and one of the gifts that God has given to us is sexuality. And C.S. Lewis, of all people, C.S. Lewis once said, and I think that this is a huge insight, God must love sex a great deal for him to have given us this gift. And I think sexuality and spirituality go very closely together.
That's interesting. Say more about that. What is the spirituality of sex?
It's the running the risk of being misunderstood. It's sharing intimacy and learning to trust not just oneself, but learning to trust another. And that other person, learning to trust you and learning to love you, and all that entails.
Do you think within that spirituality, do you think there is an element of power, power for your own self, for what you choose to engage with other people?
Say a bit more, because I'm not quite...
I've always thought, because I've thought about, I see people who cower from sex and they're very nervous about it because of what we were taught growing up. But then I do see people who have a healthy relationship with sex in life, and they are choosy about who they'll associate with and that type of thing. But to give someone that experience of you.
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying? Like to experience that with someone is a choice to do that. And in that, is there a power that you hold for yourself, agency over yourself in that way?
Yes, I think there is. But the remarkable thing is that in the intimacy of a relationship, giving pleasure to one's partner, but seeing them delight in the pleasure, to put it very bluntly, me turning you on would turn me on even more, that you were getting turned on by me being turned on. Do you see what I mean?
I get, and I think that's sort of where I was coming to. In a different sort of perspective of like, we're both coming to this space, two people who want to engage in this, and the fact that you are confident and not cowering in it and enjoying it because it's a gift from God. That seems powerful and creates a sense of confidence in a person.
And it's a huge journey to get there, I think.
I agree. I think it's because I haven't always felt that way, but I do feel that way, that when you can have the confidence in that, in a gift from God, being confident in any gift from God seems powerful and like you're living a life in alignment with God sometimes. Does that seem fair to say?
Yes, I think so. God is relationship from the very beginning of our understanding of God. That God is 3 in 1 and 1 in 3. And that there is a dynamic relationship between the 3 persons of the Trinity. And that draws us in. And that may be part of the mystery of the sacramentality of sexuality.
I love where we're going with this, but I want to sort of flip the coin over a little bit and see, I guess, in the laws of God, lawfully, what is permissible and what is not permissible. So first I'll start with sin. Is sex a sin?
No.
Never. I won't say never, but never in a consensual relationship, sex is not a sin.
Well, there's the potential for it to be a sin, as there is the potential for it to be sacramental. If there is, if somebody is compelled to do something against their will, then that is it's fortunately against our law as well. Our state has legal kind of limits on
Is that unique to sex? That the forcing, or say, is it just as much? Is it equal a sin to coerce or compel someone to do something against their will, just as much as it is a sin to, say, kidnap someone? Is that equal, or is there a little bit more of a seriousness in the sin of
I think
compelling
any
sex?
situation where there is a non-consensual relationship is an abusive relationship, and that's a place that I would hope that most people would not experience and not have to go through. There needs to be an immense amount of healing if people do experience that. Guilt and shame and all of those elements are floating around and can wreak havoc with somebody's self-image and the way they understand the world, the way they understand relationships, and there's a lot of healing needs to go on there.
I wonder if we could speak just a little bit on sex and the formative years of, I guess, adolescence and essentially children. Of a
Right.
sense, not, young, but as people are coming into age of their sexuality,
Right.
through puberty and all this, that is a very fraught time. I mean, it's just everything,
Yes.
everything, not even sex, but everything
Hormones.
is just so serious, and everything is so dire, but everything is so elating and everything. I wonder if we can speak a little bit more on that period of the shame versus the experimentations versus just really coming into your own.
Well, it's a fluid situation, isn't it? We're discovering new things about our bodies. Our bodies are doing things that we don't expect them to do. And our hormones are raging, and peaks and troughs and all of those kinds of things that we go through. But discovering our own bodies is a vital part of coming to terms with sexuality, I think.
And I think a lot, I mean, not just in super conservative religious atmospheres, but just anywhere in general, I think we don't take enough care around sex, around adolescence.
Right.
Because when you're a child, whatever you hear becomes truth, in a sense. And if
Yeah.
you tell people who are experiencing new sexual experiences, desires and things through puberty and all this, if you tell them that is sinful and wrong, that becomes internalized, doesn't it?
Well, not only that, but there's the whole commercialization of sexuality as well. And in advertising, it's used, in a shameless way to sell products, and trying to live up to a certain standard, trying to be body beautiful, trying to be something that we're not, or someone that we're not. All of that is very confusing and difficult for people, I think.
And I wonder, because this is a show about theology, and the theology of our church goes back to Jesus. Did Jesus say anything about sexuality in general, or and the ways that we associate, say, same sex or anything like that?
Christ never explicitly addressed the subject of sexuality, though he did talk about marriage. But all through the Gospels and through all of Christ's teaching runs the theme of love, loving our neighbor and loving God and loving ourselves. And those are complicated equations to balance, to love God with all one's heart and soul and mind, and to love one's neighbor as oneself. Those are the two great commandments. And maybe we need to explore that a little bit and open up that kind of dynamic of what's going on there, to love someone, and what is the balance between love and sexual expression. And we are sexual beings, whether we like it or not, and each of us discover ourselves and our identity and our orientation. All of those are complicated, mixed up bits and pieces that float around through our teenage years. And I think, to reassure anyone who's listening, whatever you're going through, it's the kind of thing that most people go through, and there is, there's light at the end of a tunnel. If you're feeling trapped, or if you're feeling in some kind of situation that is out of your control. Yeah.
And I've always marveled at just the messages we get throughout all of life, because I was raised in a tradition that was sex is wrong until you're married. But then you turn on the TV and you're getting this message that you're probably not having enough sex. You're probably not engaging enough, because the whole world is out there just having a ball,
sex all the time.
And it just always struck me that there's no middle way, which is what we
It's
sort of
crazy,
cling to
isn't
in this tradition that we follow.
Right.
There's the middle way, and I'm like, frankly, the commercials I see on TV to be that sexual seems exhausting,
Right.
and just. Who's got the time? I read a book
I'd
sometimes.
rather have a cup of tea.
Exactly. So I don't know. Do you think that there is a mishandling of sex
Yes.
in
yes,
all
there-
of society?
there
Of
is.
just
Prince Philip, the late Prince Philip, once said, the British have sex on the brain, which is a very bad place to have it. And that's, about obsessing about
right.
sexuality.
Well, I mean, and it seems like both ends just make it so much more important. So how could we not think about it and either feel great about it or feel terrible about it based on which group you're going to subscribe to? So what would you tell someone who is having trepidations about their relationship to sex?
Well,
and still wanting to be in alignment with God.
right. Try and work for integrity, in being in an integral relationship with someone. I think I've got to say, the kind of anonymity that some people seek is not the most healthy kind of way to approach sexuality. And there's that huge caricature, of course, that women use sex as a way to find love, and men use love as a way to find sex. And I think that
Could you say that again? I couldn't hear what you said.
why did it do that?
It heard something.
It hurt. I guess you said something that sounded like, "Hey Siri." I don't know where we were.
Well, we were at men use sex as an
Oh, that's
excuse
right.
for love.
So we'll
or
start
the other way around.
after you said that.
Okay.
Now say more. Oh, I asked you, the whole point was, what would you say to someone who has trepidations around sex? And you said the anonymity and the whole adage that women use sex for love and men use love for sex.
Right, yes. We come closest, I think, to sexual experience when we reflect on who we are and what we are and who our partner is and what makes the relationship, what gives it integrity and makes it a fruitful, beautiful, symmetrical thing. Now that's an ideal. That's difficult to reach that.
Well, that leads me to wonder. So we have established that sex in and of itself is not a sin. It is for us to use and enjoy and experience. And you even went so far as to say it's a sacrament. And I want to talk more about that. But what about people? So for some people, you know, sex is an association, and you have maybe not a partner, but a friend who you care about and deeply enjoy the company of, and you both consensually choose to engage in sex. That can be a sacrament. But what about people who enjoy sex for sex, and they enjoy getting with people, meeting with people, not maybe anonymously, maybe not anonymously, but for the sole purpose of sex? Is that different?
Yes, I think it is. I think it's... I don't want to sound judgmental in the least here.
Right.
And also, I'm very aware that I could sound hypocritical as well, because I'm an openly gay man, and my church affirms that and sees that as a blessing, not as a curse. And I want to affirm people discovering how we work sexually.
Right.
I want to affirm that. But I'm also very wary of anonymity and just the heedless way that some people would approach sexual expression.
Can I ask what it is about the anonymity that changes the dynamic?
I think it's the how do I put it? Is it the objectification of the other?
Right.
Making them into something that I can use.
Yeah. Rather than enjoying the company of, it's more of a there for the entertainment of.
To put it at its very basic, I suppose there's the difference between mutual masturbation and sexual intercourse, and that's a hugely fraught area. Two people can masturbate together, but that's not a sexual relationship. That's just having sex with oneself and somebody else happens to be present. But an actual encounter with another individual and all of that entails, that's a difficult area.
That's interesting. And you know, I think that if anybody were to be listening and is having issues with that, I think it's safe to say that, you know, speak to your priest.
Yes.
And you know, because this is sort of a bird's eye view a little bit, and just sort of exploring it, but that what you're describing seems like it would be a very specific situation for certain people. So I would just say, you know, on that topic, we can just say if that is resonating with you, perhaps seek counsel.
Yes, definitely.
So because I feel like you are having trouble hypothesizing it without it having an actual situation.
Right.
So that would be what I would say was seek counsel if you
definitely.
sense something in that topic.
Yeah.
I didn't actually have plans to talk about this, but it just popped into my head. What about prostitution? Because some people, a theory is sex work should be legal because you have agency over yourself. And there's a place where people say you can get paid for sex, but you have to do it on camera. That's called pornography. But if you do it transactionally with someone individually, then it's illegal. So there's a legal gray area and a legal philosophical discussion to be had. But theologically speaking,
our blessed Lord and Savior himself had a great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother who was a prostitute, and people forget that. That's in the genealogy of one of the Gospels, that Rahab was related to Christ himself. So he carried in his body her genes. So let's not ever look down or dismiss or be pejorative towards prostitution. Now, that's not to say, oh, everyone should go out and try and be a prostitute.
Right.
That's not what I'm saying. But I'm trying to get us to appreciate that there is more going on than just what apparently is being exchanged, money for sex.
Do you? I mean, is there even within that? I mean, I don't want to get too far in the weeds with that because that could be a very full episode on its own.
Right.
But do you think there is gray areas and different nuances
Oh, yes.
to all of that within that world and within
Yes.
that lifestyle?
Yes, I think one has to be adult and grown up and mature about this subject, and face up to the reality that there are all kinds of fraught issues and nuances and grey areas.
And it can be risky as well.
Yes.
With just the way that people, again, it kind of goes back to the way that we were taught about sex with the polarizations, I think, wouldn't you say? That it's either really bad or you're definitely not doing it enough.
Right.
Says the commercial and the
Right.
Instagram and the television shows of all
That's
the
a
90s.
huge insight. That's really helpful for me, actually.
I just kind of, because what happened to me, I mean, I wasn't prude or like put off by it, but it was when I was watching Friends.
Right.
As I was coming of age, I mean, and I don't mean to disparage the show, but
No.
because I enjoy the show, but everybody was having sex all the time. And
Really? Right.
They were just always talking about they were having sex, and I'm like,
Right.
They drink coffee, they go to work, and they have sex. I'm like, when do you have time to do anything else? So
Right.
it was a weird mixed message to be coming up in the 90s and to be watching the most popular show on television, and they're just like living their best life, sipping coffee. I drink coffee to this day because they did.
Right.
But I do not try to meet them step for step with my sexual prowess. Because,
Well, we're very proud of you in that regard.
so, but that it's just interesting that even within the world of prostitution, it gets dangerous because people will do a lot to get exactly what they want, but why do they want it is what I'm wondering. Was it because it's taboo and they were told it was wrong, or is it because they were told you're not having enough sex and you're not sexual enough because everything is sex sells, sex drives. People talk about how they use their sexual prowess to get ahead in careers, to get ahead in life. And it's just fascinating.
But there's a kind of, we idolize sex as well, don't we? We put it on a pedestal and we look at it as something to be attained. Whereas I want to say, think of your great-grandmother. Your great-grandmother is a sexual being as much as David Beckham or any other, kind of famous person who's a sex idol. I don't know why David Beckham's name came immediately to mind.
It must be just, the whole, British thing.
Right, yes.
So,
Yeah.
or Victoria. They're both at the
No, they're
pinnacle.
both hot. They're both hot.
Very, very attractive. But,
Yeah.
But
Am I not allowed to say hot?
I guess you can. Yeah,
Right.
they're hot.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
I mean, you can say whatever you want. It's your show.
No, it's
Just
your,
as much as it's
your
mine.
show. Right.
we share
It's
this.
our show.
That's what the drag queens Trixie and Katya, they say. We talk about whatever we want because it's our show and not yours.
Oh,
And that's how we are here.
well,
we just
I need
choose
to see
talk
that.
about
I need
theology.
to see that.
I'll send you a link.
Okay.
So, sex. What?
DNA. It's in our DNA, isn't it? Sex.
I think so.
We're born with the ability, or the potential, I should say, to experience sex.
In the Bible, we have volumes upon volumes upon volumes about men and the beget of this and the beget of that
Right.
and the genealogy of it. And you had just spoken about how Jesus himself had a an ancestor
Rahab.
who was a prostitute, Rahab. Do you think there's any kind of gender and emphasis on sex that should be talked about, or is it all equal? Is it all because it hasn't been equal in the messaging.
Right.
Men can, like Mad Men, the show. Men have a thing on the side. Women are demure. I'm reading Desi Arnaz's book now, and he said that in the Latin community, it was just always understood that men would have a big house for his wife and children, and then a smaller house for his mistress and children.
Oh.
And it was just, there was always this double standard in modern history, and it seems like gender-based, there was a double standard throughout all of time.
Well, certainly through biblical times, there was there's an irony in that Judaism is a very matriarchal culture and religion, and yet all through the Holy Scriptures, women were abused and taken advantage of and used as possessions, and even that continues with dowries and everything. But in the Bible we read men have multiple wives; they take as many wives as they want. Right.
But a woman sunbathing naked on the roof, she must be dealt with.
Right.
So
Solomon had 1,000 wives and 10,000 concubines. They kept him very busy.
I would imagine.
Yes.
Is that well, just for curiosity's sake, is that a legit number or is it an exaggeration?
I think it's a song. It's a Cole Porter song or something.
Well, what can you speak on because I think there is still to this day a double standard about sex when it comes to the genders.
Yeah.
And I wonder, do you think that is going away?
I hope so. I hope that we're seeing an equality, or at least a more integrated agency in sexual expression. And I'm all for minorities and women claiming their rightful place. I believe a woman's body is her body, not my property. And I would never dream of dictating. While I'm pro-life, I'm also pro-choice. And that's a very difficult equation, again, to balance.
Well, and that's something, being from Alabama, I have this conversation at least biannually, that I am pro-choice, but no pro-choice person is for, quote, using air quotes, for abortion.
Right. No
No one is out campaigning to have abortions. It's simply that it's not my choice to tell you whether or not to do it. I can theologically be against an abortion based on what I feel in my heart to be true, but also vote for people who will let you choose for yourself.
Right.
Because that's free will. So again, this show always comes back to theology. Theologically speaking, what do we have about sex? Is there any theological notions? Is there maybe not even him speaking on it himself, but do we have any theology that leads us to believe exactly what Jesus felt?
Well,
about
the
certain
closest we get is St. Paul. And there are some people who would say that St. Paul has manipulated the Christian gospel. Well, I don't hold to that. I think that St. Paul's ministry at a time of immense sexual diversity in a place like Corinth, let's get down to nuts and bolts and say homosexuality. Now, St. Paul never spoke about homosexuality because he did not know people who were homosexual by orientation. He knew of temple prostitution, cultic prostitution in the temple, and that's what he saw in paganism. And that's what he was condemning. And the words he used cannot be translated as homosexual or certainly not gay. So I want to just lay that kind of thing to rest, that element. But theologically speaking, I think I'd want to say that sex is a mystery, and we discover mystery through exploration. And the end of all of our exploring will be to arrive where we began and know the place for the first time. That's a kind of T.S. Eliot allusion.
That is helpful to understand and to sort of, have comfort in knowing that who we are and what we desire is okay. Not even, demanded or expected, but just whatever is okay. But
Yeah.
I do want to ask about monogamy. Is that important?
I think it depends where one is in a relationship as to how monogamous one must be. I think, for example, if there are children involved, if one has children, then one can't really be living a hippie, all-inclusive, everyone gets
So you would
a
say
free ride.
if you were to have children, your responsibility is to provide a stable atmosphere for them. And if your lack of monogamy is creating a lack of stability, that's probably sinful.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
you should probably address that. But
Yeah.
but as if there were no children, is it all up to the consent and the rules between each individual couple?
I think
or
so.
coupling.
I think so. And I think that needs to be worked out through getting to know someone. And just using somebody sexually is the opposite of what it should be about. Though, as I say, to see that what I'm doing sexually turns you on, would turn me on in turn.
Yeah.
That builds trust and relationship, I think. Yeah.
Well, I always, every time we do one of these episodes, especially something as sort of hot button as this, I always wind up coming away with more questions, but the editing in my own head, I realized, oh, that's not this episode, because like I was about to go straight into transgendered and non-binary, and I'm like, that's not sex, because that's gender.
That's
So
yes, identity.
I'm excited to do an episode on identity
right.
soon.
Okay.
But for now, as always, you have a poem for
I
us.
have a poem by W.H. Auden again, called Tell Me the Truth About Love. Some say that love's a little boy, and some say it's a bird. Some say it makes the world go round, and some say that's absurd. And when I asked the man next door, who looked as if he knew, his wife got very cross indeed and said it wouldn't do. Does it look like a pair of pyjamas, or the ham in a temperance hall? Does its odour remind one of llamas, or has it a comforting smell? Is it prickly to touch as a hedge is, or soft as eiderdown fluff? Is it sharp or quite smooth at the edges? Oh, tell me the truth about love. Our history books refer to it in cryptic little notes. It's quite a common topic on the transatlantic boats. I've found the subject mentioned in accounts of suicides, and even seen it scribbled on the back of railway guides. Does it howl like a hungry Alsatian, or boom like a military band? Could one give a first-rate imitation on a saw or a Steinway grand? Is it singing at parties a riot? Does it only like classical stuff? Will it stop when one wants to be quiet? Oh, tell me the truth about love. I looked inside the summer house. It wasn't ever there. I tried the Thames at Maidenhead and Brighton's bracing air. I don't know what the blackbird sang or what the tulips said, but it wasn't in the chicken run or underneath the bed. Can it pull extraordinary faces? Is it usually sick on a swing? Does it spend all its time at the races or fiddling with pieces of string? Has it views of its own about money? Does it think patriotism enough? Are its stories vulgar but funny? Oh, tell me the truth about love. When it comes, will it come without warning, just as I'm picking my nose? Will it knock on my door in the morning, or tread in the bus on my toes? Will it come like a change in the weather? Will its greeting be courteous or rough? Will it alter my life altogether? Oh, tell me the truth about love.
Theologically Speaking is a production of Church Nerds Productions. Executive producers for the show are Jeffrey Clark Tosca, Father Ian Elliott Davis, and Kyle Leon Henderson. Associate producer is Ed Tosca. Editors for the show are Kyle Leon Henderson and Jeffrey Clark Tosca. Music for this program is provided by Dr. Jeffrey Perola and the choir at St. Thomas the Apostle Hollywood. We would also like to give a special thanks to Louie for all the loving licks on the knee under the table while we produce this show. Visit St. Thomas the Apostle Hollywood Facebook page for more information on the show, and don't forget to follow us on Instagram at St. Thomas Hollywood.